Hello there, my name is Shaye Wardrop, and today I'm going to read you my story from It's a Kind of Magic, Stories and Spells by Second-Rate Sorcerers. My story is called Dragon-Sized, and it goes like this. Melody Moonflower stood with her classmates and stared at the poster on the greenhouse wall. She knew it was coming. Everyone knew it was coming. But dread still filled her throat in a gigantic spiky lump. The Level 4 pumpkin test was today, and every Level 4 witch was expected to participate. Top marks meant getting first choice of the senior dorm rooms. Failure meant repeating Level 4. "Ah," said Mrs. Jumper, coming up behind them. "You've seen the news. It's simple, really. Choose a pumpkin, make it grow, biggest pumpkin wins the prize." It sure sounded simple, but Melody couldn't stop her stomach from flip-flopping. It would be simple if you were good at spells, and it would be easy if you were good with plants. But Melody wasn't good with either of those things, and everybody knew it. Mrs. Jumper directed the class to the pumpkin field and told them to make their selection. Verity Valance pranced to the biggest one within seconds, in usual Verity style. And then the rest of the class kind of went mad, shoving and pushing to get the next best pumpkin. Melody stared at the rows of witches standing behind their chosen vegetable. But there seemed to be one thing missing. "Mrs. Jumper," she said, "there's no more pumpkins." "That can't be right," said Mrs. Jumper. "I planted them myself." But there was definitely one missing. "What about that one?" said Verity, with an obviously oversweet smile. 15 sets of eyes followed her pointed finger to the edge of the field and across the blackberry bushes. And there, sitting alone behind the cowshed, was a small orange lump. Of course Verity would spot it. She still hadn't forgiven Melody for spilling prickle potion in her fancy handbag. Mrs. Jumper scratched her head. "Well, it is a pumpkin," she said, and with an apologetic shove, she nudged Melody in the direction of the cows. It was hardly a pumpkin. It was much smaller than any of the ones from the field, and it was half squashed. It also stank, but that could have been because it was leaning against the back of the cowshed, surrounded by giant cowpats. Behind her, Melody could hear the class starting to work on their spells. Repeating Level 4 would be worse than eating a giant bowl of worms. So Melody ignored the laughing she could also hear and aimed her hands at her new wobbly companion. "Grow," she whispered. But nothing happened. "Grow," she said a little louder. But the pumpkin just sat there. "You need to feel the words, dear," said Mrs. Jumper, appearing behind her. "Say it with meaning." Melody tried, but no matter how many times she said the word, her pumpkin didn't grow. How were you meant to feel the words? Instead, she said them louder. "Grow!" She shouted them. "Grow!" The pumpkin wobbled like it had hiccups, but it didn't grow. It was impossible. She was going to fail the test. Mrs. Jumper thought so too. It was written across her face. "You must connect with the pumpkin, Melody," she said. "You must make it hear and understand what you're saying if you wanted to do something." Melody watched Mrs. Jumper plod back to the class. She had no idea how to make a pumpkin listen, but repeating Level 4 would be worse than 1,000 itch bug bites at once. So she had to keep trying. "Okay, pumpkin," she said. "We're going to do this. Grow." Melody imagined her words traveling from her throat to the tips of her fingers and out towards the pumpkin. She stomped her feet to make the pumpkin pay attention. It didn't really feel like she'd connected with it. She felt more connected to the cowshed than anything else. But maybe it was the stink of cows messing with her senses, because the pumpkin suddenly started growing. "Grow," she said, "grow." And the pumpkin did. It grew bigger and bigger until it was the size of a large cat. Several unimpressed cows mooed from inside the shed, but Melody didn't stop. She put all her strength into her words and ignored everything around her, her classmates, Mrs. Jumper, and Verity's enormous pumpkin that would surely win the prize. But when a twig snapped behind her, Melody dropped her hands. Impressive, Melody Moonflower, said Principal Brusha. She was standing with Mrs. Jumper, clipboard in hand. I didn't think you had it in you. Nobody did. Not even Melody believed she could do it. Now, said Mrs. Jumper, all you need to do is show us the spell you used. What? We need to see you perform the whole spell in front of us, she said. What? No one had said anything about a demonstration. Your classmates have done the same, said Principal Brusha. It was at that point Melody realised her class had gathered behind the teachers. They stood with their arms across their faces to dampen the stench of poo, and Verity had even magicked a sparkly peg to her nose. Mrs. Jumper cut Melody's pumpkin from its vine and rolled it closer to Principal Brusha. Just show us the spell, Melody. Sure, okay, she could do that. Melody pushed out her hands, steadied her feet, and said, Grow. But nothing happened. She stretched her fingers wide and focused on the words. Grow, she said, but the pumpkin didn't even jiggle. Nobody said anything, and all Melody could hear was Verity sniggering. One more try, said Principal Brusha. This was it. She had to do this. Repeating level 4 and the smug look Verity would wear for weeks would be worse than troll snot dripping in her eyes. Melody pulled strength from her determination and her irritation at Verity. She pushed every speck of power she had to the tips of her fingers and cried, Grow! The pumpkin stayed exactly where it was. But everything around it started to wobble. The ground shook, the cowshed rattled, and then the tin roof completely blew off. Cow poo sprayed from the top, showering everyone in a fountain of brown sludge. The class squealed and stepped back. Verity shrieked and tried jumping into Principal Brusha's arms. Ha, said Verity, I knew she couldn't do it. She can only make cow poo grow. Oh no, was Verity right? Had Melody made the cow poo listen to her magic instead? Had the pumpkin only grown because it was planted in magical poo? Well, this is most unusual, said Mrs. Jumper as she calmed the brown fountain. But she failed, right? Said Verity. She'll have to repeat. Not necessarily, said Principal Brusha, who began pacing around Melody's cat-sized pumpkin. No student has ever put their magic into plant food before. To make the pumpkin grow like this, it's something rather special. What? Said Melody and Verity at the same time. Principal Brusha headed to the cowshed and started searching the overgrown grass, unconcerned about the poo collecting on her shiny boots. Aha, she said, and picked up a small pumpkin still connected to the vine. If you can show us how you do it, you'll pass level 4. Melody felt like throwing up. She didn't exactly know how she'd done it the first time, but having to repeat level 4 was literally the worst thing she could think of in the entire universe, so she had to try. She marched over to the cowshed and the piles of cow poo squeezing out the gap at the bottom. She felt the words inside her. She pushed her magic to the tips of her fingers, creating an image in her head of the cow poo feeding the pumpkin, hoping it would understand the important message. Grow, she said, and the poo grew. It grew so much the wall of the cowshed split in two as a river of poo burst from its insides. Principal Brusha had to drop the pumpkin because it had grown to the size of a werewolf. Everyone stepped to the side to let the poo river flow across the grass, except for Verity, who was standing just one step too close and got swept up by the flowing poo and carried into the blackberry bushes. Ew, gross, it's in my hair, she squealed. But nobody seemed to care. What they did care about was the fact Melody had done it. The class cheered and Principal Brusha put a giant tick next to Melody's name. In the end, it was a close competition. Verity, who wasn't great at judging how close to stand to a river of poo, was still a talented witch, and that was clear in the unicorn-sized pumpkin she'd grown. But unicorns just aren't as big as dragons, and Melody's pumpkin was dragon-sized.